In the previous example, we looked at determining an average rate of speed. What this was useful for was determining an average of how fast you are moving over a given amount of time. What's more useful, especially in calculus, is instantaneous speed. That's how fast you're moving at this second. An example of this is if you're driving in a car and you look at your speedometer and it says 65 miles an hour, then your instantaneous speed at that second you look at it is 65 miles an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the instantaneous speed of the rock from example 1 at the instant t equals 2 seconds. So to do this, we're going to use time equals 2 as our first point. So t equals 2 is going to be the starting. And what we're going to do is we're going to observe a time later. And this time later, we're going to call that t equals 2 plus h, and h is going to be so many seconds, so it could be 1 second or 2 seconds, but our goal here is to let h equal 0. So we're actually going to determine what's called a limit, and we're going to be looking at when h becomes very small. So the distance between 2 seconds and 2.1 or 2.01 becomes very small. So here we go. So we have delta y over delta t. So delta y, our final point, is going to be 16 times 2 plus h squared. And as a side note, this piece of information comes from y is equal to 16t squared. So that's our time 2 minus 16 times 2 squared, all divided by 2 plus h minus 2. Now the problem with this, after we simplify, you'll notice that something with a fraction is going to be wrong. So if I distribute this out, I'm going to get 16 times 4 plus 4h plus h squared minus 16 times 4, all divided by, and these 2's are going to cancel, so I just get h. Now what I'd want to do is plug in 0 for h, because I want the distance between my first point and my second point to be 0. But you can't plug in h, because if you do, you end up getting 0 over 0, and we can't work with that. So now we just do a little simplifying, and you should recognize this from an Algebra 2 or Pre-Calc class. So this is 64 plus 64h plus 16h squared minus 64, all divided by h. And so now these 64's are going to cancel off, and you get 64h plus 16h squared, all divided by h. And now from the numerator, we can factor out an h. So you get 64 plus 16h over h. These are going to reduce off, and you get 64 plus 16h. And at this point, we're going to let h equal 0. And by doing this, delta t is getting close to 0. So when you plug it in, you get 64 plus 16 times 0, which becomes 64. So the instantaneous velocity then is 64 feet per second. And again, just to recap what we did, is we used our formula for average speed, which is delta y over delta t. And what we used is we used 2 points. The first point, time 1, was t equals 2 seconds, and time 2 was t equals 2 plus h, where h is just any number. And then what we did is we let h become 0, so that there is actually no difference in the time. And then by doing some algebra, we can actually work it out and determine the instantaneous velocity at any given second. And this is going to lead into what a limit is.